You want a guitar pedal. You need a guitar pedal. Do you really need that many guitar pedals to find which guitar pedal is for you, though? How many guitar pedals do you need before you know which guitar pedal is the one that you need to start with? How does one start with guitar pedals? Which guitar pedal is for me? How many of these pedals are not for me? Why are all these pedals here? What do these pedals even do? Don't these pedals all sound the same? Help! What is the first pedal I should buy? Well, that's what I'm here to help with. Hello, I'm Hayes Anderson. I have accumulated all of these pedals, and I want to tell you what you should start with if you're getting into hardware jamming and you want a guitar pedal. Ladies and gentlemen, your first pedal should be the Electro-Harmonix Blurst.
Wrong pedal!
I'm sorry, it should be the Zoom Multi-Stomp MS-70CDR. Let's get into it. Welcome to a Hardware Jammer's Guide to Guitar Pedals. I am your host, Hayes Anderson. This is episode 1, Your First Guitar Pedal. This is a very controversial topic. What should your first guitar pedal be? I'm going to go on the record and say that it should be a multi-effects guitar pedal. What is a multi-effects guitar pedal, you may be asking? It is a guitar pedal that has more than one effect in it. But we need something that is not just 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 effects. We need something that is far more versatile, far more expansive, something that is going to open up the door to the universe of guitar pedals for you. Here's an example of a multi-effects pedal that you probably should not start with. This is a wonderful pedal. This is a great pedal. If you know what this is, you know exactly what I'm talking about. 2 really cool companies. But this is only 3 effects. This is another multi-effects pedal. It features many effects: vibe, chorus, flanger, phaser. It also features a high pass, low pass, band pass filter, panning, and tremolo. However, the features that this pedal have may be a little too out of the range of what you're actually looking for. The reason why I would not recommend this as your first guitar pedal is because even though it features a lot of these great effects, it's very, very limited in how you can use them. And this brings us back to the Zoom MS-70CDR. MS stands for multi-stomp, and CDR stands for chorus, delay, reverb. So you may be tempted to think that this pedal only does chorus, delay, and reverb. What about phaser? What about flanger? What about rotary? What about ring modulators? What about distortion? This pedal actually has 137 effects inside of it. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, how many of those am I actually going to be able to use? Surely not all of them, right? But the reality is that you can stack up to 6 of these pedals in a row, like a mini guitar pedal board. This pedal is currently discontinued. There is a newer model out. The newer model features a different interface. I probably myself would prefer the 4-quadrant pads, but for the most part, the effects are exactly the same. This pedal currently goes for $100. It should come in a box like this, and there is no power supply unit included with it. Before we move on with the demonstration of this pedal, I wanted to point out its earlier siblings. This is the G1 On. It is designed for guitar players as opposed to the MS-70CDR, which is designed for guitar players, bass players, and synthesizer players. The primary difference between this pedal and the MS-70CDR is that it features top-mounted jacks as opposed to side-mounted jacks. And also it is mono input only, whereas the MS-70CDR is mono or stereo. This is the B1 On. It is designed for bass players. It also features top-mounted jacks. It also is mono in, stereo out, just like the G1 On. But the reality is the only difference between these 2 pedals are the colors and the algorithms that they contain. And the difference between these 2 pedals are the interface as well as the algorithms that they contain. But here's a really cool insider fact. You can actually swap out the virtual pedals that are contained in these devices. These currently go for $50 on the market. They should come in boxes like these, and they might feature a USB cable as the only power supply. There also exist variants to the B1 On and G1 On that include expression pedals. These go for about $75 a piece, and they do feature a few virtual pedals that can use the expression inputs. Before we get into the demos, I do want to disclose that this is my personal choice. I prefer, say, the G1 On or the B1 On over the MS-70CDR because number one, it's half the price, and it features the top mounted jacks as opposed to the side mounted jacks. We'll get into that more later. And this is a personal preference. I actually prefer the mono input. I find that I am using more mono input than stereo input, but when I do need a stereo input, this always comes in really handy. In my current setup, I use 2 G1 on and 1 B1 on pedals as effects send-in returns for my mixers. I find these pedals to be so incredibly handy that I currently own 4 G1 on and 3 B1 on pedals. The MS-70CDR features tap tempo, whereas the G1 on and B1 on do not. All three have tuners, which is very handy if you have analog synthesizers. In addition to the tuner, the G1 on and the B1 on feature loopers as well as drum sequences. And I promise we are about to get into the demos, but one more thing I should mention about these virtual pedals that are inside of these, the algorithms. They are based off of real-world pedals themselves. So what you are really buying when you buy either one of these is 100 or more pedals that actually exist in reality, that you can stack together, that you can experiment with, that you can learn how to use before you actually want to go buy. That's right, I think a lot of new players don't realize the power that are contained in either one of these pedals. This gives you the opportunity to learn everything that you need to know about guitar pedals themselves. Let's get into it now. Let's start by doing a factory reset. We're going to hold down the leftmost knob and power up. We're going to use a 9-volt power source centered negative. It will ask us if we wish to initialize, and we press the stomp switch to confirm. And as it is booting up, we'll see the version 2.10. This center knob will show us the memory. So these are the basic patches that we have loaded up. We're going to start out with the first one called CDR because this explains the nature of this pedal, which is chorus, delay, and reverb. The way that these work is everything starts on the left, goes from left to right. So the first thing is we have a line select, and then we have a stereo chorus, then we have a stereo delay, and then finally we have stereo reverb. I'm going to turn each one off by selecting each effect and pressing the stomp switch. Alternatively, if I go to line select and press this, this will turn off all the effects to the left of the line select. We are using the Behringer CZ1 Mini, and I'm controlling this with an external controller. So the first thing we want to listen to is chorus. If you notice, this synthesizer is very mono, very flat, very center. But when I activate the stereo chorus, we have some very stereo presence. We can now apply delay. And reverb. Changing the parameters is fairly easy. You just control with the knobs. Each of these 3 knobs represents what you see on the screen, and then there are various different pages that you can toggle through with the rightmost knob. Now I would like to go over some of my favorite effects with you. What we're going to do is we're going to start within a knit patch, and we're just going to use one effect at a time, and we're going to talk about what that effect is. To get to the knit patch, we're going to select from the menu. And if we're on patch number 1, we can just scroll up and get to patch number 50, which is empty, and that works for us. Now we have the option to select our first effect. We're going to do so by pressing up on this button. And the first effect will almost always be a tremolo. This is a very boring tremolo. Let's move on to something exciting. Vintage CE is an emulation of the Boss C1. This is an emulation of the Boss CH1 Super Chorus. The vintage flanger is modeled after the MXR MX117R flanger. And this brings us to our first topic. The rate control on the Zoom is awesome because you actually have tap tempo in certain settings. What you do is you increase the rate past a certain threshold, and it gives you number divisions as well as measure divisions. So here I have a quarter note times 8, so the modulation will take place over basically 8 counts. This flanger is modeled after the ADA flanger. And this is an emulation of the Boss CE5. Clone Chorus models the Electro-Harmonics small clone. And Stone Phase models the Electro-Harmonics small stone. This is the phaser that is featured in the Behringer Solina. Next is a model of the Boss BF2. Next is a model of TC Electronics Corona Chorus. And this model is the MXR M234 chorus. Next is a model of TC Electronics Corona Tri-Chorus. I think this is good for a Solina type ensemble effect. In fact, let's go ahead and add the small stone to that. We can also change the order of these effects. Let's put the phaser in front of the chorus. To change the order of effects, you press the leftmost knob and you select Effect Chain. And now we just pick up the one that we want to move and move it. Let's try that again. We'll add the chorus and then we'll add the phaser, but this time the phaser is in front of the chorus. Tape Echo 3 models the infamous Maestro Echoplex EP3. To continue with the delays, let's use a drum machine so we can better discern the echoes. This delay combines two delays and is based on the Eventide time factor. To set the tempo, let's use the tap tempo feature. Go back into settings, hold for tap tuner, change to tap tempo. Exit. Now when we hold down the stomp switch, we can tempo. We see that's already set to 120. My drum machine is set to 120. Let's leave it alone. Drive echo is based on the Line 6 M9 tube echo. Slap back delay is based after the TC Electronics flashback, set for the slap delay. Smooth delay is an emulation of the Boss DD20 Giga delay, which is one of my favorite delays. In fact, I have one here now, so let's do an A-B comparison. First, let's listen to the Boss DD20. And now the MS-70CDR. And lo-fi delay actually comes from the Strymon timeline. Tremolo delay also comes from the timeline. And here's another from the Strymon timeline, the ice delay. And finally, from the Eventide time factor, the filter ponk. Guitar pedals come in two flavors. The first is the traditional pedal style, such as this Boss pedal, and the other is what we call a stomp box, such as this Electro Harmonics. The difference is essentially, this is a pedal, underneath is a momentary switch, and with the stomp box, it is a stomp switch, which in this case is latching, but it also could be momentary. Effects devices can be powered at many different voltages, and while the same holds true for guitar pedals, For the majority of the time, we see that guitar pedals take 9 volts. And there is a reason why we refer to a Boss style 9-volt adapter. It is because it will almost always be able to be used universally for all guitar pedals. Many guitar pedals can also be powered with an internal battery, mostly a 9-volt battery, such as this Boss pedal. As we can see, there is a 9-volt battery clip on the inside, and there are measures that need to be taken to make sure that this battery is not accidentally drained of its energy. Let's talk about powering with batteries now. The MS-70CDR optionally takes 2 AA batteries for a total of 3 volts. I now have 2 batteries in this unit, so let's power it up. To prevent the battery from draining, you need to make sure to always unplug your instrument cable from the left input. To turn the unit on, plug an instrument cable that is a TS cable into the left or mono input. I will first plug it into the right to show that this does not turn the unit on. It is only the left. If I attempt to use the TRS cable to power the unit, it will not work. And the reason for this will be discussed in future episodes. Enclosures for stomp boxes normally do not feature a battery compartment. Instead, you'll have to unscrew the back plate. And as you see, this also accepts an internal 9-volt battery. Guitar pedals are usually designed to be small and compact, but this is not always the case. Some circuit designs demand a much larger enclosure. This is an effects device that was designed more for synthesizers. As we can see, it features no stomp switches whatsoever. It's not meant to be placed on the floor. It's meant to be placed on a desktop. And finally, we come to a peculiar quality about guitar pedals. The input is on the right, and the output is on the left. And there's a very good reason for this. And that reason is because guitar players are almost always right-handed, and guitar pedals belong on the ground. If my instrument cable is coming out of the right side of my guitar, this is going to cause a problem if the inputs of the guitar pedals are on the left and the outputs are on the right, because my instrument cable is going to inevitably have to cross in front of me to get over to them. So this is why you're almost always going to see guitar pedals with the inputs on the right and the outputs on the left. And now back to the MS-70CDR. Spring 63 is modeled after the 63 Fender Reverb amp. Lo-Fi reverb is based off of a setting from the TC Electronic Hall of Fame reverb. This gated reverb is based off of a gated reverb from the Digitech RV7. Reverse reverb is also based from a reverb from the Digitech RV7. Tremolo reverb is based on a reverb from the Eventide Space. Holy Flurb is modeled after the infamous Flurb reverb from the Holy Grail by Electro-Harmonix. This happens to be Josh Scott's favorite reverb of all time. True story. This shimmer reverb is modeled after the Strymon Blue Sky in shimmer mode. Particle reverb is modeled from the Line 6 M9 particle verb. Space hole is based from the Eventide space black hole algorithm. Mangled space also comes from the Eventide space. Drive options are far and few between on the MS-70CDR, but here we found a reverb that actually has a drive. And finally, another algorithm from the Eventide space, the dual reverb. We will talk more about compressors when we get to the B1 on and the G1 on, but for now, this is a compressor based off the MXR Dyna comp. Don't be fooled, you might think that compressors make things louder. But what compressors really do is make things even, and we'll get to that later. But let's quickly point out some of the notable compressors that are available. This compressor is called OptComp, and it is based off of the Aphex Punch Factory. This compressor is based off of the DBX160A, and it happens to be my personal favorite. This compressor models the infamous Orange Squeezer. Gray Comp is modeled from the infamous Ross compressor, which is a 2-knob compressor. I have built a 4-knob version from a kit. You might find that you won't be using many compressor effects when you use the MS-70CDR. They are much more useful with the G1 on and the B1 on because we're going to be dealing with distortion. As I mentioned before, we will talk more about compressors when we talk about the G1 on and the B1 on. We won't really need compressors for the MS-70CDR. Another thing to keep in mind is that a lot of these compressors are mono, they're not stereo. So if you do use them, put them at the start of your effects chain rather than at the end. The exciter is based on the notorious BBE Sonic Maximizer. We probably won't be using this one much, but if you need a little extra oomph, you can always add this to your signal. One thing to note off the bat, this one has 2 knobs, whereas the emulator on the MS-70CDR has 3 knobs. The Zetron filter is modeled after the Electro-Harmonix Qtron. M filter is based on the Moog MF101 low-pass filter. And finally, the step filter was modeled after the Zvex Sequoia. So far we've only been using digital synths and drum machines. Let's try an analog synthesizer now. We're also going to stack a bunch of effects and see what happens. So we're going to jam out. We're going to start by using a bass pitch, and then we're going to add a cry filter. Then we'll skip the auto pan for now and move on to a stereo delay, followed by a stereo reverb, and then we'll come back and activate the auto pan so it won't be so extreme. MS-70CDR also has a stereo input, so let's test that out with my UBX-A, which is off screen. This is a patch that round robins the oscillators between left and right. And this brings me to an interesting Easter egg that we can find within the MS-70CDR. This vinyl Crackle emulator, generator, if you will. And this is actually a pretty nice little feature. So if you ever need that fake vinyl crackle sound, you can always get it via the lo-fi delay in the MS-70CDR. An important thing to point out is even though you can stack up to 6 virtual pedals in this device, sometimes you can only get 5, 4, 3, or even only 2. In this particular case, I was only able to stack 2. These 2 particular algorithms are very intensive, so they take up a lot of room memory-wise. If we notice, I have the lo-fi delay, and then the mangled space as number 2, and if I try to add anything else, I see that my DSP is now full. And there really is no getting around this limitation apart from getting a second MS-70CDR. And now let's try an experiment. Let's see if we can get that Solina sound. I have my Behringer Solina off screen, and we're going to see if we can emulate the modulation and phaser effect. At the end of my chain is a super chorus in mono mode, and then an ensemble, then a compressor to keep things nice over on the phaser side. We're going to use the stone phase, and then another chorus, and then finally we're going to use the line select so I can turn everything on and off. First, we're going to listen to the Solina with its effects. And now with my effects. And we have an added effect that we can actually make this in stereo now. That wasn't too bad. Let's move on to the G went on and the B went on. But before we do that, we need to talk about the difference between guitar pedals and bass guitar pedals. Perhaps the most important aspect of a bass player's tone is the actual bass frequency itself. And guitar pedals sometimes will filter that frequency out. This is a guitar pedal that was designed specifically for guitar players. And this is a version of that circuit that was designed for bass players. The difference is twofold. This features a pad switch, which allows the input signal to be 10 dB quieter. And this also features a mix knob, or a blend knob, which allows the bass player's original tone to remain unchanged and allow the affected signal to be mixed in to whatever level that they want. Many times you'll find that the only difference between the bass variant and the guitar variant is the blend knob itself. In terms of a quality for synthesizers or drum machines, I would go with the one that has the mix knob, if the price is right. These two equalizer pedals are different in that one is designed for the guitar player's frequencies and the other is designed for the bass player's frequencies. This is another main difference that you will find between bass guitar pedals and just regular guitar pedals. In this case, this EQ pedal is designed to handle more lower frequencies, and this EQ pedal is designed to handle more mid-range frequencies. We also will come across circuits that are designed specifically for bass players, such as this envelope follower or this overdrive distortion pedal. And while these are designed with the bass player in mind, these of course can also be used by guitar players, synthesizer players for your drum machines and your samplers. Let's now move on to the G went on. We'll start by powering it up with a factory reset. To perform a factory reset, hold down the home button and power the unit up. We're going to power with 9 volt from a DC power source. And we're going to scroll to yes and hit the enter key to say all initialize. This G went on is running at version 1.20, and we start with presets. We can select the presets by using these 2 keys, and we can use these 2 keys to go through the banks of presets. Right now I have the volume on my mixer turned down. Let's turn it up, and we hear some pretty interesting noise already. I think this might be what tends to turn people off of this pedal. Let's listen to this patch. I have a bass patch. That's really beefy. If we go to another preset, not so much noise for some reason. Whoa, where did all that noise come from? If we take a look at what's going on some of these, this particular preset starts with a compressor, then it uses this deluxe amp, which we'll talk about more, the Deluxe R, which is a Fender amp, and then we have a hall reverb. If we look, we see what's going on here. Inside the amp setting, the gain, and the tube are where this horrible noise is coming from. But let me show you our first trick. What we're going to do is we're going to add our first effect. And it's going to be a dynamic filter. We're going to put it at the start of the chain. And we're going to select ZNR, which is the Zoom Noise Reduction. We go into Enter and we can change the threshold. The noise is gone. This is a trick that you will use with this pedal many, many times. You'll almost always want to start your chain with a noise gate. If we listen to the patch now, you can hear the noise still. But if you play it right, you don't. But if I hold the note down, there's the noise. There are many different ways to get around this, but for the most part, I just like to use the ZNR and we're done with it. But let's forget about the presets. We don't need them. We already saw how to set up our own virtual pedal boards with the MS-70CDR, so let's do that now. I want to now discuss some of my favorite virtual pedals that are found within the G1On. So let's start by getting back to our first patch. We'll hit Home, and we're down to Museum again, and let's delete what we have. So to delete, you just select the Delete function, and then you start deleting them one at a time. And what we're left with is just a bypass, which really does nothing. Now we have our init patch. We can start adding whatever pedals we want to. So let's go over these pedals now. The first thing I will do is I will set up our noise gate by pressing Enter and then selecting the noise gate. I will increase the threshold. And now we can start adding our overdrive and distortion pedals. Overdrive is a simulation of the Boss OD1. T-Scream is a simulation of the Ibanez TS-808 Tube Screamer. Governor is a simulation of the Marshall Govna. Dis Plus is a simulation of the hugely popular MXR Distortion Plus. Dist 1 is a simulation of the infamous Boss DS1. Squeak is an emulation of the Proco Rat. Fuzz Smile is a simulation of the Fuzz Face. Great Muff is a simulation of the Electro-Harmonix Big Muff. I have my own that I built right here. The G1On also comes with many amp simulators. Let's talk about some of them. Generally speaking, a guitar player will use the amp as a distortion or fuzz pedal. They like to just plug their guitar straight in, turn it up as loud as possible, and just let the ears start to bleed. Distortion pedals allow guitar players to interject by throwing something in between their guitar and the amplifier that distorts the signal and allows the amplifier to be played at a much more reasonable volume. In this particular case, we can do whatever we want. We can just use the amp simulator by itself, or we can have a pedal going into the amp simulator. The Deluxe R models the sound of the 1965 Fender Deluxe Reverb. However, this is merely an amp simulation. It does not include the actual reverb, but we can always add reverb to it. Big Crunch models the amp of a Mesa Boogie Mark III. Tangerine models the sound of the Orange Graphic 120. MS-1959 models the sound of the Marshall Plexi 1959 that was made in 1969. MS Drive models the sound of a JCM 2000 Marshall stack. And finally, DZ Drive models the sound of a Diesel Herbert. Let's now quickly talk about interfacing. With the MS-70CDR, we were using cables like this. These will not work as stands with the G1 on or the B1 on. Instead, you will need 1/4-inch breakout cables. This will be the output of the G1 on, and this will go to your mixer. Of course, you do not have to use the G1 on, the B1 on, or the MS-70CDR in stereo mode. You can always use them in mono mode by using a mono cable. Many reverbs and delays feature a tails feature. Let's talk about what that is. We have a really nice reverb setup here, and if we go into the page setting, we see that tails are off. Let's test this out now. Okay, if you notice when I disengage the effect, it cut off immediately. Let's turn tails on and see what happens. Tails determines whether the effect is cut off immediately or is allowed to tail on. Let's go into tune mode to tune this horribly out of tune noise box. To do so, hold both pedals down and try to tune. Now we are in tune. We just went over some of the name brands of the G1 on. Let's talk about the generic effects now. There are so many useful effects that I have not even covered yet. Let's talk about some of them. We'll get past the compressors for now. Some of the first interesting effects that we come across are the wahs and filters. We also have the step filters from the MS-70CDR. And when we get past the distortion and amp simulators, we come across the modulation effects, starting with tremolo, phaser, duo phase, vibrato. We have an octaver, pitch shifter, mono pitch, and harmonic pitch. This is a great effect for doubling up parts. We have a bend chord, ring modulator is one of my favorites, but however it's not too easy to get to. You have to dial into the frequency. To play around with it, and it would be nice to have this as an external modulation effect, but we can only wish for so much, right? We have a roto closet. And we have a bit crusher, same thing as the ring modulator. We need to go inside of it to really play around with it. And finally, we have an organ effect. And then we go into the delays and reverbs. Let's set up a virtual pedal board now. The G1 on and B1 on operate a little differently than the MS-70CDR. The MS-70CDR displays its virtual pedals from right to left, as probably as it should be. But for whatever reason, the G1 on and the B1 on, they go left to right. So we start with our noise gate. Then we're going to add an octaver, which you can see. And then we're going to add a Z organ, followed by a stomp delay that is tap tempo set. Our tempo is currently 112. To set the tempo, go into the main menu. We press the menu button, and we see the BPM is set here. And then finally, we will apply a stereo chorus. I'm now going to disengage all these effects and apply them one at a time. The G1 on and B1 on also feature loopers and drum machines. To access the rhythm, we just hit the rhythm button. And then if we want the looper, we press the button again and it switches over to looper. One more time when we're back into rhythm, and we can try a pattern. For the looper, we start our sequence, arm the looper, and stop. But one thing to note about the looper is that you need to actually activate the effects first. You cannot record a loop and then add effects to it later. So let's turn the effects on now and try a loop. And now let's move on to the B1 on and finish up this episode. The B1 on is nearly identical to the G1 on. The only difference being that some of the simulations are designed for a bass guitar. Like the G1 on, let's go over some of the name brands now. While the G1 on did not have a simulation for the HM2, the B1 on has bass metal, which is a close approximation. Bass driver is a simulation of the widely popular Sans Amp Bass Driver DI. I've got the big boy. DI Plus is a simulation of the MXR Bass DI Plus. And that peak resonance that you heard brings up a very good point. We should probably add a compressor to the end of this signal. We can do so by going to Home, Add Effect, Dynamic Filter, and we put it here at the end. As was previously stated, my personal fave happens just to be the 160 comp. Bass BB is a simulation of the exotic Bass BB preamp. DI5 is a simulation of the Avalon Design U5 preamp. There is also a version of the Bass Overdrive, as well as the Bass Big Muff, as well as a Bass DS1, as well as a Bass Proco Rat, and a Bass Fuzz Face. And like the G1 on, there are also amp simulations. SVT is a simulation of the Ampeg SVT. B-Man is a simulation of the Fender Bassman 100. HRT 3500 is a simulation of the Hartke HA 3500. And Flip Top is a simulation of the Ampeg B15 made famous by that Motown sound. And Monotone is a simulation of the Polytone Mini Brute 3 favored by jazz musicians. And finally, Super B is a simulation of the Marshall Super Bass. One way to view distortion pedals and overdrive pedals is to view them as preamps, and as such, you don't need a whole lot of volume going into them, so do experiment with the volume. Overdrives and distortions are great to stack before things like bit crushers. Let's try that now. We will first listen to the bit crusher without any distortion in front of it. We have already gone over many of the effects that are available in the B1 on when we went over the G1 on. So let's make a jam now. Let's use the drum machine inside of this unit to help us make a jam. Let's go through the various distortion simulations with a highly resonant patch that I have set up. And let's now mangle that analog signal up with a bit crusher. Where can we go from here? Well, let's try stacking 3 DS1 pedals together. And how about stacking 3 BF2s together? Or what about stacking a Big Muff with a Tube Screamer and a Rat, just like the No Moon by Idiot Box Effects does? We can also change the order of the effects with the effect chain. And if you need a bigger sound, you can always add a stereo chorus at the end of the effect chain. Let's now try out these various distortion simulations with an analog drum machine. We can always destroy that beautiful analog signal with a dirty digital bit crusher. But watch what happens when we put a lot of dirt in front of that bit crusher. It talks, and you can always use the 4-voice synthesizer to make any drum machine sing. Before we move on to a final jam, let's discuss battery powering options. However, unlike the MS-70CDR, the G1-On requires 4 batteries. Now, if you're asking yourself the question, how is it that the MS-70CDR only requires 2 and the B1-On, the G1-On only require 4? Well, you'll just have to wait until episode 2 for that answer. And like before, to power the unit on, we use a TS instrument cable. We covered a lot of ground with these 3 pedals, but there's still a lot to be discovered inside. There's a whole lot with these pedals. They're basically Swift Army knives. And I really think that any hardware desktop jammer would find them invaluable to add to their collection. Let's see if we can muster up a final jam now using all 3 of these pedals. There's not a whole lot of room left on this table, so we'll probably have to use pocket operators. I'm going to use the B1-On and the G1-On for 1 pocket operator each, and then those outputs are going to go into this native mixer. I'm going to mix 2 stereo signals in, have 1 stereo coming out into the MS-70CDR. And along the way, I'm going to show you one trick in which I'm able to use an effect as a mute switch. The trick is to use one of the effects as a mute switch, and you do that by going into it and just setting the level to 0. It really doesn't matter what you choose. I like to choose a compressor. Now I can play the pocket operas at the same time to sync them, and then use the mute switch when I want to add and remove the bass. This concludes the first episode. Thank you very much for watching. If you made it this far, you are a legend. Of course, by now you've probably already have your own first guitar pedal. You probably have many guitar pedals. But I'd like to know, what was your first guitar pedal? This episode is now over, but be sure to stay tuned for more. On the next episode, we're going to talk about buying used pedals and taking care of the pedals that you currently have. We'll talk about things like the knobs, what center negative is all about. We'll also talk about removing horrible Velcro from the back of your pedals. Those dirty guitar players like to step on these things. In fact, I've had this pedal around forever just to show you how to remove this. And if you want to support this channel, please check out my Bandcamp. I have several albums there for sale, and I sure would appreciate if you'd pick 1 or 2 up. Finally, I would like to give a big shout out to JHS Pedals. They have taught me so much about guitar pedals. They provide a lot of education on YouTube for free, and I think that they're just one of the best companies out there. That's all for now. We'll see you next time.
Uh,